Okay, so now that we're done with the logo itself, we're going to go in to do the 3D text, and we're going to do the 3D particle systems in order to complete the logo. So we're going to go back into Davinci Resolve here. Okay, so back into Davinci Resolve. So we have a logo, smoke, flares. We have, just to recap, we are here as far as an output. There's a couple things we're going to do before we get to that final output, but right now I'm going to go ahead and start building our 3D system. So we have our particles here, and then we have, I'm going to create another underlay real quick, and we're going to call it, we're going to do yellow, and we will call it 3D text. So F2, 3D text. That's not how you spell text. Okay. Apparently, you can't start it with a 3. Yep, you can't. You can't start something with a number on an underlay. Note to self: don't start with something with a number on an underlay. We'll just call it text. Okay, so we'll start with text. That's probably going to be the easier of the two. So we'll create a 3D text node. So that's actually up here. There's a whole bunch of 3D options. But the best thing to do is just go ahead and create a 3D text node. I'll just do add tool. And it's all under the 3D menu set. So 3D text. And there's a few other things that we need for 3D as well. So in 3D, we're going to need a camera, which the camera sees the text and says, oh, we're going to merge all those together into one 3D scene. And then we're going to also need a renderer. And so if I go to here, you can see we have our checkerboard pattern. So let me go ahead and write some text in here. We'll type in blurred pixels. Okay. And so we have our text, merge 3D. Okay. So we have our camera and our render 3D node. Okay, enable. All right, so we're going to leave text, camera, 3D. Let me make sure we're not missing something else. So 3D. Yeah, we're not missing anything. So camera. Okay, so there's my text. It goes into my merge 3D, and then my camera goes into my merge 3D. Or no, my camera doesn't go into my merge 3D. My camera goes into my renderer. There we go. Now, camera goes into my merge 3D, and okay, so merge 3D. Me. Some of my stuff back here keep hitting spacebar because now I'm in 3D world, and that's how you get the bigger control panels in Maya. There it is. That's my problem. I can't see it. My camera is in the way. So let me go back here. Camera, just camera. I just want my camera. Cool. There we go. There's my text. All right. So we'll go. This is where we'll probably need the other screen. So we'll leave this here. We're going to go type that into 1, and we are going to zoom out here. Get our text zoomed out. All right, and we're going to move this up a little bit. Camera, okay. We are going to change the fonts. There is a font that I downloaded off the internet that was open source. Not open source, but it was free to use for projects. And so I'll just give the gentleman credit in the description below if you want to use his fonts and download it. But let me get my scene here. Are we zoomed to fit? Okay, so I'm at the end of my scene actually, and I want to get my camera in position where I want it at the end of my scene. And so with this text, we're going to go ahead and change a few things. We are going to do not line spacing. We're going to justify, change a few things. Tracking, shrink the size a little bit. Maybe that's about roughly where we want the blurred pixels. Text right there, just around the lower thirds of the screen. We'll do tracking a little bit more. And then we get to go into, this is actually 2D text at this point, but we get to turn it into 3D text in a second. We get to extrude it. So this has actually turned it into 3D text for us. Now you won't see that. Let me load this in here. So you'll have to go into the scene to see that the text is actually 3D. So, and let me kind of rotate. Nope, don't want to move stuff. I want to try to rotate around in here, and I forgot how to do that. That's just going to move stuff. All right, let's not touch anything. There we go. Sorry. So that's Alt and the middle mouse button. It doesn't function the same way Maya does, so it kind of throws me off when it comes to 3D stuff. So the extrusion, I can go pretty big. I can do small. We're going to do that, and we're going to do a couple subdivisions here. And then we're going to do a bevel. Okay. And so there's that. That's it. Now, in the render scene, we're going to go ahead and turn on lighting. So now our text is now dark. So it's it doesn't have, or we'll cast shadows as well. So it doesn't have any sort of have any sort of light applying to it. Now it's really just a white texture. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some more lights into the scene. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a I'm going to add it into the merge. So insert tool 3D light, point light, and there's my point light right here, which is attached to my text for some reason. Probably I'll just select my point light. There we go. All right, so there's my point light. Now I'm going to take my point light and I'm going to take it and put it toward that blue that we've been messing with. We can adjust the intensity, but I'm going to do that. And I'm going to create a duplicate of this. So I'm going to Control Copy, Control V, Control Copy, Control V. It's two merges. We don't need two merges. We're going to take this one and put that one in there so I can put as many lights as I want to. I'm going to take this one and shift it over here. And actually, I'm going to push this one back so it just picks up edges. And I'm going to also do another point light, do the exact same thing. And we're going to put it over to the right. And then so the other thing I want to do is I want to create a couple more point lights. So let's do the center one. Let's create a duplicate of that. We'll run another point light in here, and I'm going to move that out. Or actually, we're going to move that over here. So, but we're going to change its tonality so it's more orange. And then I'm going to increase its intensity. And so, and we're going to tweak these quite a bit once we get this all set up. But we're gonna start some animation real quick here. So I want the logo to be in position by frame 280, like everything else. So I'm going to go ahead and create some animation on this 3D text. So we're going to go into the text of the or rotation of the characters. So I can rotate them and spin them around. So what I'm going to tell you right now is I think I'm going to take these lights, these point lights, and I'm going to shift them toward that orange color as well. Oh, this is the most intense one. So let me maybe dial position-wise. Where is this one? So maybe we just move this away. Dial its intensity back a little bit. And do the same with that one. Dial its intensity back a little bit. Okay, so anyway, so we're going to do character rotation. Start that back at 0. So we go back to the beginning, or actually 280 is where I want the characters to be done rotating. So they're going to be at 0. So I'm going to keep my keyframe there. We're going to go back to frame 1, and I'm going to start rotating them. And so it's just about how many times do I want them to spin in. So let's do like 1.5 or so. So, and I'm not just doing a spinning logo. I'm going to also take the position transform of these and or the offset. We can offset the z-axis, so we'll put it back in the camera. So scene 1, we're going to have a z offset of 10, or the frame 1, we're going to have a z offset of 10. Frame 280, where I want the logo to be, we're going to z offset of 0. So now it will literally spin in. Okay, so that's how that will work. Let's take this render, and we will, actually, let's take this merge, and we will create another merge off of it, and we will connect that render to it. And let's look at this. And there's our logo with our graphics moved in. So now you notice I've got this kind of orange thing, and I just want that to kind of catch. And I'll probably adjust those lights in the color grading, but I want those to catch the color that is the particles that are coming in. So take a good look at this. I just want final text here. Maybe be a little bit further out with a smaller size. Okay, so ultimately 280 frame. Okay, so we're good. This P isn't really standing out. So I'm going to take this point light, the blue one, and I'm going to duplicate it one more time. I'm not going to paste it with something selected. I'm going to do this. And then I'm going to take this point light, and I'm going to shift it. Actually, I'm going to bring it closer and a little higher. So I'm going to catch the top of that P. And let me shift this over a little bit. There we go. So there's our logo. Um, now, this looks ridiculous. So we have like lens pull effects and everything like that, but this particular logo doesn't have that. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually add a defocus to this as well. I'm not going to do it right this second. Actually, let's do it right this second. So let's add a defocus to the, well, we could do a couple things. We could technically do, um, a defocus and do it like software. Get a Z buffer, and kind of figure out what it would be. Like we could do enable depth of field effects. We could shrink that down. I'm not going to do that. We're going to do that for particles, so we won't do that here. So we'll leave this as software render. We're just going to do defocus. So I'm going to add a defocus here. And we're going to keep it kind of similar to the same settings we have before. I definitely am going to adjust this bloom threshold, and I'm going to drop this bloom level because this thing has plenty of light on it. I might even have to dial those lights back. So I'm going to take our focus here though, and just like everything else, I'm going to defocus it and bring it into focus, partially into focus on frame 280 at 281, something like that. So we're going to bring this down to like 1 at 2.55, and then we're going to go back to the first frame, and we're going to pull it out of focus to, say, a 9. Okay. All right. And then what we're going to do, actually, let's take it all the way. Let's put it to a 10, just so it ramps back. I want it to be pretty out of focus before it gets there. Okay, so there we go. Logo's there. We got everything but the particles. Now, technically, we could just go ahead and render this here, and it would be nice. And we might just do a preview and see what it gets. So yeah, let's do that. Let's go ahead and output a preview and see what we have before. So real quick, I'm going to do. We'll just throw this out on my desktop, which is not the most efficient way to do this, but we'll call it preview. We'll throw it out on my desktop. We'll do ProRes, high quality, add to render queue, just real quick. Just make sure see the full composition here. All right, I should see it. So let me go back to edit. Oh, here's one final note. You got to connect everything to your media out. So my defocus, so my merge needs to go to my media out, and then there we go. Now it'll be there. Okay, so yeah, so we're going to call this preview. If we spell correctly, so preview, and let's go ahead and start render, and I'll be right back when it's done rendering. All right, so our render is done. It took about 6 minutes, so it wasn't very long. The defocus didn't mess with render times very much. And once everything came into focus, the render times got a lot quicker. So let's go ahead and give it a look. First thing right off the bat, I'll notice we did not increase the polygon sides on our defocus for the logo, but that's fine. This is just kind of a speed test. to see how the animation's working. So we're just going to go ahead and hit play here. The smoke looks very good. It's coming in at the right speed. I think the Blurred Pixels logo looks pretty good. It's all coming in. The lights kind of come up, and yeah, that's looking really good. It looks still looks a little synthetic. Obviously this blur is a mess, so we're going to correct that. The smoke looks great. I'm probably not even going to mess with that. I was thinking maybe color grade it. I'm going to probably just do a blanket color grade over the whole thing. But the logo comes in pretty nice. I did notice right here there's a little effects from the defocus, but we can probably fix that with a glow. It probably won't become very noticeable, so that's fine. But yeah, this looks really good. We're not done yet. Obviously, we haven't got the little flares and everything yet, but we are at a very good point to save, and we'll start working on the flares. Now that we have text for the logo, we're going to go ahead and get started on the flares, or the little embers that are going to be going across the screen. So that's a particle system. And particle systems in Davinci Resolve, they use graphics card and they use RAM, and also use processors. So the more you have of each, the better. In my case, I have a 4-core Mac Pro i7, so it's technically 4 cores, 8 threads. And so we'll get good performance with the particle system, assuming we don't use terribly too many particles. With the graphics card, it's not going to push that nearly as much. We are going to render it in OpenGL, which will use the graphics card. But it's not going to be as necessary. And as far as my graphics card in this particular computer, I have a Radeon Pro 560, which is embedded into this laptop. So there are definitely better options out there, which I'm looking forward to. Then I have, as far as RAM goes, it's 16 gigs of RAM. That's the maximum this particular laptop has. So just be aware when you do particle systems, try not to go crazy and add like, oh, I need, I'm going to be doing thousands and thousands of particles. I'm on a beach and I want to have every piece of sand be moved like a particle. They don't do that in Hollywood. And when they do big particle systems in there, they have multi-threaded cores, servers they can send it over to have it process and start chunking each one of those particles. We don't have that. We will cause the system to crash. As a matter of fact, this is the second time that I'm recording this because the system has crashed. So we're going to go ahead and get started with particles in Davinci Resolve real quick here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do everything within the particle system here, and I'm not going to use this background to work with. So I'm going to create a particle. We're going to create a particle emitter. We're going to create a particle renderer to create those particles. We're going to create a camera, obviously. We need a camera for 3D worlds, which will create a merge 3D. And we'll put the particle renderer there. Got our merge 3D. And then we need a render. So we're going to do that, 3D render. We're going to change this over to OpenGL because that's what we want to do. Use the graphics card. And then what I want to do is I want to take both of these displays and I'm going to kick one over to the merge so we can see the 3D environment, and the other one over to the render. And in addition to that, I'm going to create temporarily a background node so we can see the particle systems on our render. So we're going to use the merge for that. Okay. So back into the particle. You need to have a particle renderer, and you need to have a 3D camera. The particle renderer is separate from the scene renderer. The scene renderer just renders 3D objects in the scenes, but the particle has its own kind of rendering engine, which you can specify. So we're going to go ahead and do particle emitter. So it's already in the scene. It's actually pretty tiny. let me move my camera out of the way. And you can see these little white dots here. These are the particles. And my particle emitter is actually a sphere, which is not what I want. What I want to do is I want to change that. So I'm going to go to my particle emitter, and we're going to change the type of geometry this is. We're going to go here. We're going to change the region to a rectangle, and we're going to go 5 by 5. Okay, and we are going to rotate that rectangle. We're going to rotate it. That's the camera. We're going to rotate the particle emitter. So it is 90 degrees. And then we are going to move it just over from the camera. We'll take the camera, we'll move it a little bit further back. Okay. So in our scene here, we have particles generating from this wall here. And that's not really ideal. We want them to come across the screen like a flurry of sparks or embers. Maybe there's a fire off in the corner or something like that. But we basically want that to just generate. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to decide how many particles are generated each frame, and that's the number. In our case, we're probably not going to want 10 particles generated each frame. I don't know that we're going to need them, so we're going to start with 5. And then we can add a variance to that. So maybe there's plus or minus 2 particles. Each frame generated more. They have a lifespan. I'm not going to mess with that because I don't think we're going to actually see them die on frame, but if we do, we might need to make that longer. We can also adjust their lifespan variance. And then we're going to give them an inherent velocity. So, or velocity, and then there's an inherent velocity. So there's 2 types of velocities in here. So velocity is the initial force or the initial direction that these particles are going to go when they spawn to life. And so every frame, 5 are created, and they start going in a specific direction. And so what we're going to do is tell them, okay, you're going to go, 0.4 in that direction. And so if I hit play, you'll see these particles are moving from the left to the right, and they're generating in this direction. And we can see them. And now they're going to start dying off at about 100 frames. So they start dying off. That's why we start losing them here. But we can see them all throughout the frames on our camera here. So that's the particles. And that's an inherent velocity. Now, or that's a regular velocity. So that's the initial velocity. It doesn't change from its original force. Unless we have something act upon it. So this particle systems are all based on Newtonian physics. So we're just kind of giving it an initial velocity of 0.4, and that's how fast it's going to go. I don't know that this is fast enough. This is actually running at 16 frames a second, so it seems a little slow to me, but I could be wrong. Maybe I'll bump this up to 0.6, and we'll try it. The other thing is velocity variance. Well, I can make those individual particles have their own, velocity around that 6. So, maybe if I add 0.24 variance, now my particles are going to come at a different speed. Not all of them are going to have the exact same speed, which is more natural. If all of them had the exact same speed, then it's kind of like they're fixed points and we're just flying through them. Kind of like a star field, like in the old Star Trek TV shows. If a ship's flying through a star field, those would have a fixed speed, but we want particles to have their own kind of inherent motion. So the other thing we want to do is we want to pick what type of particles these are, and so we have several options: point, bitmap, blob, brush, line, n-gon, point cluster. I'm not going to click on point cluster because that's what caused me to crash last time. So we're going to look at point, which is actually what they are now. Bitmap is we replace each one of these particles with a texture or a little graphic that we've created. And if you have played old video games from, back in, well, actually even video games today, that's kind of how they do like smoke effects and stuff like that. They'll have a tile, a little graphic, a little puff of smoke that they've created in Photoshop, and maybe they have several different versions of it, and you can use that, and each particle has that map, and then maybe there's an animation of it or not. And so it kind of creates this kind of smoke effect. We'll probably end up messing with that at some point. In our case, we want to do a blob particle. I believe is the one we're looking for. Yeah. So here's our particles now. And there's a blob. And so I'm going to pause it here. And so if you notice, we can fly our camera through this. So it does have 3D space. And so we can move our camera slightly through this, which we will for the final animation. We could even go with an N-gon, which would have like starriness. We could create geometry, some weird stuff. But we're going to go with Blob because Blob seems like it's going to render quicker. And we can give it a color. So if I want to give it this sparky color, I want to go a little bit more red with that. Okay, so there's my sparky color. It looks horrible. But we're gonna tweak it, obviously. So this is the way it moves. Now we got a problem with that. There's no gravity. There's no gravity at all, and you'll see those glitches. By the way, the glitch is just rendered a frame previously, and it's just showing that frame. So when we go to render it, it should fix itself. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to change it. We're going to add one more thing to this. We're going to give it some gravity. So we're going to add particles. We're going to do a force. We're going to a directional force. All right. And so now, by default, the directional force, just because of the way it defaulted here, it gives a 0.1 strength down, or 0.1 strength down 9 degrees, and kind of adds kind of a gravity effect to our particle system. So I'm going to increase that a little bit. Try not to increase these things when the particles are running, though, because it gets really weird. The render likes to use the frame before it as a reference. So, all right. So we're going to go back to the particle emitter. We got some color variance. So let's do some slight red variance, maybe. Each one of these particles will have a different subtle difference. Okay, so that's the particle system. Again, they appear to be running at 16 frames a second. We're probably going to need twice as fast. They should actually be okay. So, okay, so now we have this merge. We have this render. Okay. First thing we're going to do is with the OpenGL render, we're going to go ahead and do do accumulation effects and output channels. So first output channel we're going to put out is a Z, which is a depth channel. So one of the things I can put out is the depth of the particles. So right now it's a 3D scene, but once I put it, run it through the render node, it becomes a 2D scene. But that being said, you can take some of that 3D data, which is a Z map, and it's a black and white map that says, hey, this information, the white information is the stuff that's closest to you, the dark information is stuff that's furthest away. And so you can take that information, you can go, okay, I know now the distance of these objects. So we'll take that and we will be able to do a kind of a depth of field for the camera. The other thing we're going to do is, if you notice here, I'm going to zoom in on this particle because it's doing it right there. They don't really have much transparency. You can't see through them. So we're going to go back to the particle real quick here. We need to fix that. So let's do that. Well, so they don't have that. Let's see what a line looks like. Nope, line is just a line. That's it. Ngon. It's a little better, but they do have these little lines between them. Yeah. All right, so one of the other things we can do is size controls. We can actually have them start bigger over their life and get smaller. So some of the particles will die, or as the material burns out, they get smaller, and we can add a little bit of size variance to that, and we can even make their size based on their velocity be a little different. We probably won't do that. But it's just a few of the things that we could do. Faster they go, the bigger or smaller they are, type of thing. We can add blur, which seems like it's going to choke the computer, so I'm not going to do that. Let me real quick save, just in case we crash again. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back to our render settings. And now that we have, there's only a little bit of overlap here. We're going to use the enable animation effects. And then what I need to do is I need to go to my camera, and I need to see where this depth of field starts. So in order to do that, I need to go to film back, visibility. I need to see the near clip and the far clip. So let me see the subdivisions of each one of these. Okay, so that's my far clip, and my near clip is probably right in front of the camera. So let me change my lens information. Focal plane, there we are. So, okay, so focal plane is, see this green stuff right here, or this green? This is what's in focus. So I'm going to do a 50 mil lens. Because it's kind of just something we're used to. So 50 mil lens, and that's what's in focus. So now this looks weird. We've got these extra little balls around here. This is the amount of blur we have. So that's how far those balls get, essentially. And then when you have the quality is essentially exponentially creating the different size, or exponentially creating copies and adjusting them. So the more we have quality, the more copies we have. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it at 10, and then as far as my quality, and then I'm going to just adjust the amount of depth of field. Okay, and then the other thing is I'm going to turn that off. So we've got our depth of field. I'm going to turn Z off. That's kind of like, we could generate depth of field here, or we could do it in post. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a vector, though. And vector is really cool. So vector is, I'm going to take this render, and before I put it over my merge, I'm going to add a vector blur. So I'm going to go to, I'm going to basically add a tool here. Add tool, blur, and I'm going to do vector motion blur. And what it's going to do, it's actually going to get from the 3D scene, it's going to get the motion that we're getting and automatically create what would be realistic motion blur for those objects. So if we run back, and this is going to really slow down the system, but that's fine. We're going to let it run a few frames, and we're going to see the motion blur we get out of this. Now, so a vector motion blur is assuming like what's called a 180 degree shutter. You can increase the blur scale. I wouldn't. The blur is going to be built based on it's just based on what a physical film camera would have, which is a 180-degree shutter, or basically a shutter that's if we're looking at 24 frames a second, it's 1/48th of a second. So it creates a motion blur that would be realistic for that camera. So it actually looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and back out of this real quick here. We're going to save again. So I got my vector motion blur. Let me jump to frame 300. Okay, so the other thing I want to do is, in addition to blur, I want to add a glow. But I might do this later in the final render, later in the layers. So let me shift space, add a glow. No size. Ooh. Slightly hot. Just make it a slightly hotter glow. Like, this is ridiculous. This would be too cartoony. So we're going to do a little bit more glow. In hindsight, these particles are actually too big. So I'm going to go back into the particle size, particle size is right here. And we're going to shrink these bad boys down even more. Which is going to take a second to re-render. And actually, let me get this. Just delete this. Delete that point. And see how we do it. Okay, so that's kind of cool. So again, we won't know what this looks like until we render it, but so far, as I can tell, we're looking pretty good. Okay, so again, we're going to save this. We're going to get rid of our background. We're going to get rid of our merge. I'm going to leave that glow on there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put this all together. So we have our text. We'll put this glow over here since it's the last thing in our chain, just to kind of organize it. And I'm going to create a merge, another merge between the media out here. So a merge there. And create a connection into that glow. And we're going to view this real quick here. And at frame 280, where our logo is done. So we'll wait for all those particles to move, render, and everything. Okay, so we're going to have to make some adjustments here. So let me save this, and we'll make some adjustments in a second. Okay, so we have our 3D particles built. We have it merged over our scene. So what we're going to do is we're going to finish up and do a few color corrections and grain and everything like that. Just for maintenance, I went ahead and moved the particle system over to the right here, just so everything kind of just cascades down this chain, almost like these are individual layers. Now, once we get to the merge, I'm really not liking the way these particles are showing up. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust the amount of depth of field, because I don't think there's enough of these particles showing up. They're not quite showing up right. So I think there's too much depth of field there. And I'm going to see what bringing the quality down does. Maybe if we, so we'll save ourselves some render time if we can bring it down. So this is 0. So if we bring it up and it becomes less noticeable, the changes, then we don't need to really bring any more in. So I think at about 4, it becomes less noticeable. So there's that. I'm going to see if I can bring up the intensity of the glow a little bit more and drop the glow size. There we go. So I'll bring the intensity back. Drop the glow size to something extremely small, because I really just want the center of these glowing. Okay. Normal is going to work on that, and then blend will maybe reduce it a little bit. So my color's still a little cartoony. Let me go back to the particle emitter. Let's go to the color. Okay, so we're having some wonderful. That's when you start working with particles, the refresh time on when you change colors has to. What it has to do, it has to render a couple frames before to figure out where the particles are before it renders the frame you're on. So it takes a little time to figure that out. So we're just waiting for the update there. Again, that's still too cartoony, too saturated. Is really what it's coming down to. We're too saturated. It's a little closer. Maybe a little bit more saturation. That's still too much. Okay, maybe go a little brighter. No, we're going to go darker. Back down to darker. So this is all a balancing act between the glow and the particle color and everything like that, just to see how it mixes over. So we can get rid of this 3D. I don't think we need it anymore. So I think that's pretty close. So let's see if we can adjust this glow a little bit more. Unfortunately, I keep hitting frames, so okay, so glow, Gaussian. I don't know that I've ever had to change that. And the glow size. Just do extreme. That's too much. It might not be. So what the idea is probably we're going to end up having to do a test render at some point, just to see that we have the spacing and everything moving. You know, we might need to add another force in here. So insert tool, particles, turbulence. Just to add some randomness to the particle system. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do a real quick render and see what we have. And then that way we'll know if there's anything we need to change. Okay, so we've completed our render. I had to actually go back. I forgot to clear the cache, and actually even I cleared it the wrong frame, so it's going to still glitch, but it's not going to glitch nearly as much as it did last time. So we're going to go ahead and play it here. Particles are still moving kind of slow. They're not terrible. The turbulence, I really kind of like what it's doing, because these things are actually kind of shifting a couple different directions. There was a glitch. So the particles are kind of shifting in several different directions, and so I kind of like what it's doing. So I just want to go through and see frame by frame here, and you could mess with this and tweak for days and not even get the same result. I've actually done this particle sequence because I was having some problems with Davinci Resolve. The first build, it was crashing a lot on particle sequences, and I didn't realize it was actually my text font it didn't like, but it was just causing everything to crash. And so I've done this a few times, and actually I have one that I completed. So it's just an adjustment of let's look real quick here. It's just adjustment of different things, but even every time you do something, it usually can end up different, especially when you're starting from scratch every time. So here's mine, which I went a little darker on. And I got a little bit redder sparks and a little bit more turbulence going on. And I think I went with smaller extrusions on the text and everything like that. But it's kind of the same concept. The little bit more turbulence makes it super realistic in that these particles are going in this direction, whereas these are going down. And so the turbulence just kind of impacts certain particles in certain ways. And it's just really kind of cool. Because it's almost implying that there's kind of a breeze in there, and you kind of get that with the smoke as well. The smoke coming down and transfers everything. So, it just kind of makes like there's movement going on here in the air and everything like that. So that's my finished one. And I think there's a little bit more grain in there. This one's a little bit less grain, but the idea is kind of the same. And so you could sit here and you could spend hours messing with it. And every time we render this, it's another 20-minute render. I believe you got an idea of what you got here. Other than that, I think I might have color corrected this a little bit better so there's actually black in the background a little bit. But everything was built the exact same way with the exact same keyframes and everything. I think the blur on the text might have been a little bit longer. But yeah. So I hope you enjoy these series of videos for this creating this logo. So the next one we're going to do is going to be probably a little bit later, but it's going to be music. And so I'm trying to figure out what to do with that. I think I might actually create like a music channel to do that type of stuff on there. That way for those interested in the visual effects or the filmmaking aspect of it or the animation stuff, they can look at one channel, and then the music and sound design can all be done in another channel. Try to keep things organized. Maybe it'll do that, maybe I won't. But just kind of keep an eye out on things, and I'll try to let everybody know if the structure changes on the channel. So if you like this video, thumbs up, thumbs down if you don't like it. That's fine too. But if you don't like it, if you have a little bit more constructive feedback, you want to say, hey, that you could have done it this way, or you could have done it a little bit differently. That's perfectly fine. I am not an expert on this. I'm not teaching anybody expert. I'm just walking through this. Mainly because I haven't done it in probably a decade. So I'm just walking through this, and I've forgotten a lot of things. It's amazing sometimes what I've remembered. So if you have tips, tricks, anything that you want to share with the community as a whole, put it in the comments below. But if you do like it, if you do want to kind of take this journey with me through this animated short that we're doing, then subscribe, sign up for notifications. And if you want to, help me out along the way, that's perfectly fine too. If you feel like you're learning something, that's great too. That's the whole purpose of this, is that anybody at any different level might get something out of it.